I'm going to introduce someone I've known for quite a few years now, Los Angeles City Councilman Paul Koretz. But I knew him before that because he used to be a state legislator. And what I remember best about Paul Koretz, and even today, is that he is a major fighter for animal rights and the environment. He's involved in a long-term project in Los Angeles to save a kind of a trail or protected lands so that the cougars that the city of Los Angeles and Los Angeles County residents are trying to save from extinction, so that the cougars can move around and essentially mate with other cougars elsewhere and not disappear. So he's not just a guy who's concerned about the housing wars. He's got a broad picture of the world. So I'd like to introduce Los Angeles City Councilman Paul Koretz. Take it away.
Well, thank you kindly, Jill, and good morning. I'm proud to join you virtually, the members of Livable California, to stand up in opposition to Senate Bills 9 and 10 and in defense of our neighborhoods. And I want to thank Jill and Rick for making this happen and for having me here. Today, we continue the fight for local control, the fight to preserve the very urban fabric of our communities. This is a fight against gentrification and a fight to preserve generational wealth. It's a fight to preserve our infrastructure and a balance of public services. And lastly, it's a fight to prioritize affordable housing over luxury buildings in order to produce and preserve units for Californians of all incomes. We're really fighting against one man's unrealistic utopian views that he wants to impose upon all Californians. Scott Wiener believes and argues that single-family home neighborhoods with trees and lawns are immoral. And if we scatter much denser luxury market rate units throughout neighborhoods throughout California, that all will be right with the world. From my point of view, all will be right for developers, but not much else. As we saw in our fight against SB 50 in 2019 and the 9 bad bills of 2020, especially SB 1120, the associated marketing mythology for SB 9 and 10 will cause confusion and false assumptions. And each year, Scott Wiener says, well, now we've made it more moderate and we've changed it. Now it should be acceptable to everybody, when in fact, the bills are not that different. And in some cases, year to year, they're only made worse. First, a few realities though. Most California cities and counties are in dire need of more affordable housing. But I can tell you that consistently, these bills miss the mark in obvious ways and will only degrade our communities. SB 9 and 10 focus on producing market rate units, in contradiction to the vast majority of California's locally adopted general plans and housing elements, which contain detailed goals, policies, objectives, and programs crafted by our local governments to guide the development of very low, and moderate housing production. I'm repeating what I've said on record before. State control of local zoning undermines not only the integrity of cities and counties, but strips residents of their ability to engage in a meaningful planning and community building process. At the local level, we understand the politics of proximity. Land use is a local issue. The closer you are to a project or a plan, the more you become concerned. Move away from the project, and the project's impacts to be of lesser importance. Move far enough away as far as Sacramento, and you only see the potential good for the projects. You don't realize the negative potential impacts. I believe we must stay vigilant, and I'm grateful to an organization like yours that's worked tirelessly to analyze each iteration of these bad bills that come out of Sacramento to inform Californians of the impacts. It's because of the leadership of active civic groups like yours that SB 50 and the hydra of 9 bad bills of 2020 failed. And now with the organization and support that you're continuing to build, the fight to protect our neighborhoods will continue and will continue to be won. I should remind you, though, how close we came to the passing of SB 1120. It was partly because we had earth-shaking events happening in 2020. We had the terrible COVID crisis, which continues unabated. We had the unbelievably disastrous killing of George Floyd and many months of introspection after that. We have the economy that is getting worse and worse, and cities that are close to bankruptcy, including Los Angeles. I think we'll get through it. I know we'll get through it, but it's certainly been a distraction. And so when we had SB 1120, up the last week of the legislature, it was a battle. A lot of us were calling legislators. I was calling and texting my friends in the legislature up until midnight. And we managed to keep the bill at bay. It finally just squeaked over the 41 votes that it needed right around midnight, and they ran out of time to transmit it to the Senate, and so it failed. But we beat it by a hair, and we don't want to be in that position again. The last time in the Senate, which was the House of Origin, where it was introduced, I believe it had only one vote in opposition. I think it was Senator Henry Stern. And so it really flew under the radar. Nobody paid great attention to it. Legislators weren't hearing a lot of opposition, again, because there were more pressing things going on. And then late in the game, I introduced the motion to have the city of Los Angeles oppose. We fought hard with the state assembly, and again, we were barely successful. So we certainly don't want to put ourselves in that position again this year. And as bad as things continue to be this year, and as focused as we might be on some of the strange things that have already happened at the federal level, and in Los Angeles, we have had a stunning series of deaths of very notable people in our history, and former council members particularly. But none of that is going to be able to distract us. We're not going to let this sneak by unnoticed this year. In fact, almost the moment these were introduced, we were watching for them, and we already introduced, before we went on a couple-week break at the end of the year, we introduced opposition to SB 9 and 10. So we're ahead of the game there. We'll certainly be lobbying hard to get our council on board. It may not be as easy because we lost a couple members. Former Council President Herb Wesson was term limited out, and David Aru, who was probably the other strong leader in opposition to all these bad bills, was defeated. So we lack a couple of the strongest opponents, and we've gained at least one member that's very sympathetic to them. So it will be a little more difficult, but I think because we'll be fighting from the beginning, we'll make it happen. Also, some of our state lawmakers think that homeowners and the elected representatives of our 482 cities and 58 counties are trying to block the development of new housing. And I don't think that's true. They need to stop blaming us and start looking at themselves. State regulations filled with unfunded mandates and endlessly lengthy, expensive, and complex processes prevent local innovation in the realm of housing production. And in order to keep our plans current in Los Angeles, we now have the largest planning department in the nation. If you ask any planner, They'll tell you stories of the time they've had to spend endlessly researching state laws in order to ensure compliance, even for the simplest and most straightforward changes in a proposed plan. At the same time, local planners struggle to build consensus and update plans as they explain the new realities of land use law to community members who stand appalled and in disbelief by state rules that were adopted without any input from them. Usurping local control means grassroots solutions are not given an opportunity to take hold as they're snuffed out by state rules. We must respect our varied ways of life and have a place for everyone. Let our residents and our local governments decide what should be by right and what should be discretionary. Most communities in California have plenty of room for infill development in their regional downtowns and commercial corridors and cores of their communities, including my very own city of Los Angeles, where the adopted housing element of our general plan proves that we have the capacity and can add to our housing stock with minimal displacement. 55% of California households own and live in single-family homes. And the largest displacement of the residents of stable single-family home neighborhoods is uncalled for. We don't need to force our communities to give up their way of life and the unique character of their communities when we have so many opportunities to grow without the senseless and hostile disruption resulting from these bills if they become law. Following this exact approach, I, as a city council member in Los Angeles, have introduced a motion to expand adaptive reuse incentive areas citywide and in commercial zones when the development is reserved explicitly for moderate income and lower income households instead of market rate luxury units. My motion will go through the process so we can perfect this concept by including stakeholder participation. I don't fear comments, I welcome them so that the appropriate policy and development can be achieved. So what exactly would occur if these bills are passed? Well, Senate President Atkins' SB 9 is a copycat of last year's SB 1120 and ignores the land development process in the Subdivision Map Act. It overrides local development standards, public participation, and forces local jurisdictions to adopt substandard lots. You'll see reduced yards and the separation between buildings, less light and air, and looming buildings. The additional units on the lots will have a crowded and unbalanced site plan, guided not by local regulation, but by pro forma. The results will be a pattern of development that our state previously defined as blight, but now will be mandating the blight. Senator Wiener's SB 10 will allow cities to ignore their general plan. The general plan is both a land use constitution and a living document created with extensive community outreach and environmental study to build a consensus about how a community should grow. This bill creates inconsistency between the general plan and zoning and removes environmental review. The result will be a public service and infrastructure imbalance, environmental degradation, and the lost opportunities of generational wealth for Californians as land title will be passed from homeowners to developers and real estate syndicates. The form of a building also matters in finance. Small apartment buildings over 5 units can only be financed as commercial property. These apartment buildings become inaccessible to the middle class, and the loan products are typically not designed with owner occupation in mind and require significant down payments. Whereas 1 to 4 unit dwellings are considered residential and have lending programs for first-time buyers for both conventional lenders and the FHA, these larger, more dense projects on what were single-family home lots do not. And last year with the 9 bad Hydra bills, there was some interpretive confusion even among our own city staff who looked at each legislative bill as a standalone idea and sometimes recommended support for these terrible bills or sometimes support if amended, without the amendments causing the bills to become less of a problem. The nuance of city planning rules, neighborhood by neighborhood, historic neighborhood versus industrial, hillside versus valley, transit corridor versus transit deserts, were already complicated. The impacts have varied and often are ridiculously negative, especially when included with our current planning complications. So for 2021, I'm out in front. I'm leading our city to ensure that we're clear about what these bills do and where we stand. Our opposing resolutions, with your support, will become the formal position of the city of Los Angeles, hopefully early, which is key. A lot of legislators look to what the city, what a city of our size is saying very early on. So please join us in the fight to protect local control, and together with other local leaders and citizens groups and other cities and counties like yours, we can win in the next round of bad bills in my city and across the state. I want to remind you, though, that Senator Scott Wiener just doesn't and won't take the hint that his housing ideas are wrong for California. It's terrible for LA, but even his own hometown of San Francisco hates them. And he recognized this, for instance, against SB 50, when from his own Twitter on December 17th, 2019, he said, Board of Supervisors just voted again to oppose SB 50. The board has now voted to oppose it not once, not twice, but 3 times. We get it. You don't like it. Yet for some reason, Scott keeps recycling the same bad ideas and expecting a different result. And sometimes that happens. You find a year where we're not vigilant enough, and it could squeak through. But this is not going to be that year. So I ask you to contact your state and local elected officials and contact them early in the process, particularly your state senators early, because we don't want to see no opposition the way we did last year. Ideally, we'd like to see it die in committee in the House of Origin, although that will be difficult because the president of the Senate is so strongly behind this issue. But let's get on it early. I think we can make sure that this doesn't happen, but also I think we should work with all our local council members and supervisors to develop solutions. And that's one of the arguments that are made in the legislature. Well, you're not proposing anything. So let's propose some measures to actually address the real shortage, which is not luxury housing. The real shortage is low-income housing, moderate workforce housing. And I think we can propose changes in our local zoning to actually produce what we need to keep people off the street, to allow people to live near where they work and not have to drive 50 or 60 or 100 miles from an affordable home to their place of business somewhere in Los Angeles. So let's do it. Let your state legislators know we're not ignoring the real problems. We're trying to address them, but these bills and destroying neighborhoods is not the answer. So I look forward to fighting these battles again with all of you, and let's get started.
Wow, that was fantastic, Paul. I want to say that we have 225 people on, and that is a huge record for our teleconference. So you're a superstar, apparently, Paul.
I don't think I'm the draw. I think it's the battle that's the draw, but thank you. I'll take it.
All right. So we have a lot of people with their hands up. Rick is going to handle the questions from people to Paul. And then if Paul doesn't know the answers, one of us might jump in, but he knows a lot. So let's get started, and Rick will go in order. And